This is the least we can do for people, for our troops, for our soldiers who have fought to protect our values of freedom, democracy, and human rights. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. And I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Cook.
Mr. President.
Senator from Alabama.
I would ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, the Veterans Job Corps bill, properly written, could be a positive piece of legislation. And I'm not speaking about the intent of the bill, whether it can be done effectively, but as ranking Republican on the Budget Committee, I have to point out that this bill violates the budget, violates principles of common sense and good management, and it's typical of the reason this government is on an unsustainable financial path. It's typical of why we're going broke. This bill will cost $1 billion over 5 years. It's spending on a new program, claims to be offset by new taxes and new revenue sources. But my staff has worked on it and has confirmed that there's a 302F Budget Act point of order against this Veteran Jobs Corps Act and the manager's amendment, and I'm confident that if and when it's raised, that the parliamentarian will agree. There's a budget point of order against it because it would increase budget authority for the Veterans Affairs Committee's allocation above what was agreed to in the Budget Control Act. There was a limit how much we'd spend on the Veterans Department, the Veterans Committee. That's how much they had. They had a limit in the number of dollars they got. It was part of the August Agreement Budget Control Act a little over a year ago August. And this is a serious thing. And we told the American people we would raise the debt ceiling by about $2.1 trillion, but we were going to cut spending, immediately raise the debt ceiling and allow $2.1 trillion in more spending, but we promised that we would reduce spending over the next 10 years by that same amount. And that was the agreement. The President signed it. Our Democratic colleagues supported it, and it passed. And the debt ceiling was raised, so government continued to go forward when we were borrowing 40% of every dollar we spent in the United States government, borrowing 40 cents of every dollar spent. And if we hadn't raised the amount of money that we could borrow in this country, the entire government expenditure would be reduced immediately by 40%. So that's how big a hole we're in. And so what this new bill with good purpose does is spends $1 billion more than we agreed to spend. And so what occurs? What occurs is that if a person objects to that and raises a budget point of order, the Senate has to waive it. Openly, publicly, before the world, have to say, we can't find money within our budget to expend $1 more billion. We can't find that. We're just going to spend it anyway, and every penny of it either got to be borrowed or would be paid for by increased revenue somewhere. And so we're going to vote on that, I believe, and I intend to offer that amendment. But it's even worse than that. They say, well, over 10 years, we promised to raise enough money to pay for this. That over the 10-year period, we'll raise the $1 billion. Don't worry about it. These tax increases and revenue enhancements will pay for it, and count on us. But it's not so. I hate to say it. We have in this bill 1/3 at least of the amount of money that would be spent by the Job Corps bill. 1/3 of that comes from a well-known gimmick, a manipulation of the accounting system around here that allows us to spend more money than we have. And it scores as not an expenditure. It scores as being properly as a valid pay for, and it's as bogus as a $3 bill. I say without danger of contradiction that this is a gimmick that if a private company were to do it and utilize it and to manipulate and mislead stockholders, they would have a lawsuit against the officers of the corporation. They would. It's totally bogus. Let me explain to you how it's done. This has been done before. I've offered a bill called the Honest Budget Act. Senator Olympia Snowe joined me in that, and it would eliminate a number of misleading gimmicks and fraudulent activities, and this is one of them. So, all right. There's a certain corporate tax revenue that we get from corporations, and the drafters of this bill cleverly got the idea that they could just accelerate the amount of money from fiscal year 14 into fiscal year 13. They would bring that money back into 13 and collect it just a little bit earlier, and they could say we got another $135 million in revenue in 2013. And so we can spend it. And it doesn't cost anything because we've got this new money and it's paid for. This new Veterans Jobs Corps bill will be partially paid for, about 1/3 of its total cost will be paid for by collecting corporate revenue taxes sooner. But think about that. If you pay your tax sooner, if you pay your tax a few months earlier and you pay it in 2013 fiscal year, well, you don't owe it in 2014, do you? You were planning on paying it in 2014. And now you don't have to pay it in 2014. So the whole has moved from 2013 is to 2014. You move the money over here, but you don't have the revenue the next year that you would normally have had. And you do that over 5 years, and oddly, it comes up every odd year. The 5th year, and which is where our colleagues wanted the number to fall, in the 5th year, it shows as if we had a $392 million total increase in revenue. The money added up each year over 5 years, plus increases, totals $392 million. Isn't that great? We didn't raise taxes. All we did is cause in a little money in a little earlier, and we've netted $392 million. Right? Wrong. Year 6 is where the revenue doesn't come in, and in year 6 it shows that you'll bring into the U.S. Treasury $392 million less, because that money was collected early in the previous year, $392 million less in year 6. It never is a net increase to the U.S. Treasury, although it might appear to, according to the conventions of accounting that the CBO uses around here. And CBO knows this is true. They would tell you if you were asked about this. They know exactly what this system is, but they follow their rules, and in the 5th year, it suggests we have a $392 million surplus from this advanced collection of corporate taxes, and it's not so. So, my colleagues, this is a problem for us. We do not need to continue down this pathway. We need to be honest with the American people. The President of the United States should be objecting to this kind of stuff. He should say, no, you can't play that game. The Majority Leader, Senator Reid, should be saying, no, that's a manipulation. The Budget Chairman, Senator Conrad, ought to say, no, it violates the Budget Act. This isn't the way to do it. Now, Senator Burr's alternative piece of legislation that will do much the same thing is an honest piece of legislation. It does not violate the Budget Act and is not subject to a budget point of order. And this legislation could have been crafted that way, too. But being as I guess, greedy as we are, rather than having to face up to a little bit of a difficulty of finding a few $100 million, a couple of $100 million out of $3,700 billion we'll spend next year, rather than trying to find $200 million out of $3,700 billion that we'll spend, we'd rather manipulate it this way. And I just got to say, what did we mean in August a year ago when we said we were going to cut spending by $2.1 trillion over 10 years? Was that just a joke? Is this the kind of thing we're going to do every time a bill comes along and that's got some appeal to it and we'd like to support it? Are we not willing to stand up and pay for the legislation? Is there no waste, fraud, and abuse in this government that we couldn't really work on? There certainly is. This government is mismanaged. It's out of control. The chief executive spends his day, every day, getting on an airplane, going somewhere to make a speech. What we need is somebody in the shop managing the taxpayers' money. And when Congress tries to play these gimmicks, we need a president that says no. That's what this country needs, and until we get it, we're never going to bring spending under control. And what does my president say and my Democratic colleagues in the Senate say? Send more money. We can't cut anything. We've got no ability to find savings. We just need more money, American people. Send more to Washington. Private sector doesn't make a whole lot of difference in an economic sense exactly where it comes from. It's all a further drain out of the private sector so the public sector can spread the money around, maybe solicit some votes in the process. So this is how we're getting into this fix. I'm concerned about it. I think we should not go forward with the legislation as drafted. Perhaps some compromise can be reached. Senator Burr's worked hard on it. Maybe the Democratic colleagues can get together and put up a veterans jobs bill that's honestly paid for. I know they could. And if it's worth it, and we can find ways to make choices that we're paid to do, the tough choices and priorities, and help veterans find jobs through some sort of mechanism like this, then let's do it. But let's pay for it. And let's don't use these gimmicks. Let's don't go at it in a way that misleads the American people about how much the legislation is truly costing. I feel strongly about it. I'm getting frustrated about it. It's always, well, it's just a few $100 million here and a few $100 million there, and the bill needs to pass, and don't raise these problems now. You're slowing down the machine. We got a lot of things to do. Doesn't look like we're so busy right now, but people think we've got things to do, and they don't want to have to wrestle with the minutia of a few $100 million a year. But we should do that, and if we do that every day, and if we stay within the budget amount that we agreed to last August, we will have made some improvement in the overall debt course of America. And just to make clear that the Budget Control Act agreement called for a reduction of $2.1 trillion in spending over 10 years. During that time, we were projected to spend $47 trillion. So the net reduction would be from $47 to $45 trillion. Now, surely the Republic is not going to sink into the ocean if we reduce our spending from $47 to $45 trillion. Surely we can find that. It's not enough. We need to do about 3 times that much at a minimum. And we can do that too. And it's still a substantial increase in spending. This is not a cut in spending over 10 years. At the current rate of spending, we spend about $37 trillion. So we're going from 47 to 45 trillion over 10 instead of 37 trillion over 10. Still a major increase in spending over 10 years. But we're told that's impossible. All we can possibly do is a 2.1 trillion in reduction. I know the President was claiming credit for reaching this agreement, but the budget he submitted this year wiped out the entire $2.1 trillion. It wiped out the entire sequester and raised taxes by $1.6 trillion, about $1.1 trillion increased spending, actually $1.5 trillion in increased spending and about $1.8 trillion in increased taxes. No cuts at all under his budget, actually a spending increase over the trajectory we were already on, which is an unsustainable trajectory. I know I'm being frank about this. Some can say this is a political argument. Well, we're in a political season, and I believe what I've said is accurate. I believe what I've said is true. I believe we're entitled that budget point of order lies against this bill because it spends more than the Veterans Affairs is allocated to spend. And we need to vote on that. And it's this kind of breaking the budget and spending more than we agreed that's helped put us in this fix. And we need somebody to help bring order out of chaos. We're on an unsustainable path. This nation is on the wrong track. We're on a track to decline and debt and financial crisis, not the road to prosperity. We cannot continue in this path. Erskine Bowles and Senator Simpson, before the Budget Committee, told us that we have never faced in this country a more predictable debt crisis. That was a joint statement. Never faced a more predictable financial crisis, was the exact quote that they said. And what they told us was, we're on an unsustainable path. If we stay on this path, we will have some sort of debt crisis. Another 2008, 2007 recession caused by a financial bubble in the United States government. What a disaster that would be. If, as we're struggling to get people back to work, get the economy on the rise, we have a financial crisis again, putting us back into recession. We need to avoid that. We've got to be mature and honest about our money. We've got to get our debt under control. This bill violates the budget. It violates sound principles of financial policy. It contains a major gimmick, really a bogus allocation of over $300 million that claims to exist. It does not exist at all. And so we need to fix that. Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, I appreciate the opportunity to share these remarks. I guess I see no further colleagues. I'll note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will then call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The senator from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent. The Senate stand in recess subject to the call of the chair.
If there is no objection, it is so ordered.